Hi, welcome back to the Guillemot Kayaks Workshop. I'm Nick Schade. We're working on the microBootlegger Sport Sea Kayak. I'm a little late getting into the shop today. I was dealing with emails this morning, trying to catch up. I have in the past declared email bankruptcy where I just delete everything I haven't read yet, and that can be a relief. I'm a long way from that now, but sometimes it feels like a good idea. Yesterday I got the outside all glass, deck and hull, looks fabulous, looks really great. So today I need to trim off the excess glass, flip the parts over, start scraping the inside. I'm also going to start gluing up the coaming riser on the deck. So I think what I'm going to do today is trim the excess glass. And then I'll glue up the coaming riser on the deck. So I'll take the hull off the forms, disassemble the forms, set up the cradles again and flip the hull over into the cradles and start working on scraping the interior of the hull. We'll see how far we get once again. So here I have the coaming riser parts, which will end up being glued together on top of the cockpit area here. These are just some 9mm plywood, and they'll end up in a stack, something like that. And then I have a front and back bit here as well. So these will go something like that, and something like this. So they just need a little bit of cleaning up, and I'm just going to glue them together. I'm not going to glue them onto the boat at this point. So any squeeze out or whatever I can clean out with my bench mounted belt sander, and it's just easier to do it that way. After gluing the riser together and cleaning it up, I will then glue the lip on and clean that up. And then I'll take that assembly and glue it in place on the boat. I could just glue it on all right now, but that would just make the cleanup harder. By gluing these pieces together, I can clean up both inside and outside. When I put the coaming lip on, the outside here will already be cleaned up, and I just need to clean up the inside edge, and I'll round that over, etc. And then when I put this all together, I will do one more cleanup of the last glue bond here, round that over, and glass everything, and it'll be good. Before I assemble these all together, I've got a little bit of flashing left over from the CNC machine, and I'll just take my high-tech file here, a little stick with some sandpaper stuck to it, and just clean off that flashing a little bit. These pieces are joined together with a little scarf-like joint. So I'm just going to glue the scarf joint together and make 2 rings, and then I'll glue those 2 rings together. So I'll just use a little super glue on that. Now you may wonder why I cut these in such a way that I had to assemble them like this. Basically just so I use the plywood more efficiently. If I make a big ring like this out of the center of a piece of plywood, I've wasted all the interior space here. And so, you know, cutting these, use half a sheet of plywood. Where if I cut them sort of in half, I can nest them together much more efficiently, and so I can get all these parts out of like 1/8 of a sheet of plywood. So it just is a way to use the plywood more efficiently. The top ring, where I want it to look unbroken and clean, that's cut out of one piece. I just took the loss of that center section as the price I had to pay to make it look the way I wanted to look. Here, it's going to be less visible, and seeing the edges of the plies in here, I think will look kind of cool. This is a different way of making a coaming than I've done on a lot of my other strip built boats. I typically put vertical strips in and then wrap a lip around that, laminate a lip around that. But this is definitely a much simpler way, and I think it'll look cool. It's going to blend in with the plywood recess here nicely, and sort of tie it all together. So I think it'll look good. First thing I want to do before I glue this all together is make sure I don't glue it down. So I'm going to put some tape around here. And again, you might ask, why don't I just glue this up on the workbench? It would be easier. I wouldn't need to worry about gluing things down. The reason is the coaming has a slight curve. It's nearly flat, but it's not perfectly flat. If I glued this piece together on the bench and it was perfectly straight, then when I go to glue it into the cockpit hole, this coaming recess here would be pulled up towards the lip, because the lip would be quite stiff at that point, being about 1 inch tall. And so I don't want to distort the recess here. And so, well, this is still nice and flexible and it's easy to get down there, I'll glue it down to that so it matches the sweep of the coaming. I'm going to use this blue flash tape again. Nothing sticks to it. It's a little bit more expensive than masking tape. Masking tape would work, but I have this stuff. Might as well use it. This does not conform around curves as well as masking tape, so this is a gradual curve. I can get it conformed to that, but I'll just do it piecewise, the rest of it. So to glue this together, I'll mix up a little bit of epoxy with some of the fumed silica in there, the colloidal silica, Cabasil, whatever you want to call it. And I'll probably add a little bit of wood flour, just to give it a bit of a brownish tinge. That way any glue that I fail to clean up will sort of blend in and look natural in there. It's only going to be enough glue to cover this layer here, and then I'll clamp the heck out of it. When doing a glue up like this, there's no such thing as too many clamps. The more you can fit on, the better. While the glue is soft and easy to clean up, I'll just come by and scrape off whatever glue I can reach. Now I'll take the hull off, just put it aside so I can disassemble the forms. I have the same cradle forms I was using when I was stripping up the deck. I had flipped the hull into these forms. And now I'm just going to attach these forms to this aluminum strongback just to have a cradle while I'm working on the deck. So I'm just going to measure out the locations, 28 inches 98 inches and 158 inches from one end of the strong back, and I'll mount some cleats there and screw these to those cleats. So now I've got the hull in a secure position. It stays in there pretty well. Remember, I have some foam weather stripping on the edge of these cradles, which that provides quite a bit of friction. This doesn't really want to move. I guess I'm about ready to start working on the interior. The first thing that's going to happen is I got to knock off all these little tabs. If you remember, I put these here to help keep the deck and hull aligned as I was sanding it. I had a tooth on the hull and I had a tooth on the deck. That way, if you push in on it, again, there was a part line there. So with the tooth on it, if you pushed in on one side, there would be the tooth from the other side to push the other side in with it. That way they'd move as a unit. So as I was sanding on it, I wouldn't end up rounding over the edge of the deck or the hull in the process of trying to ferret out. It seems to be pretty effective to do that. The other thing I want to do is I did a rough cut to trim off the fiberglass here. I'd like to get that trimmed down really close to the edge of the wood. This is painfully sharp. At this point, the epoxy is still a little bit soft. It's only a day old, but as that gets harder, this is a bunch of cuts waiting to happen. So I will trim that back. And like I said, I'll knock the teeth off and we'll go from there. A quick scrub down with 40 grit sandpaper breaks that edge, makes it so it's not going to be sharp anymore. I will do a final trimming of this whole edge after I've glassed the inside. It's going to get buggered up with more epoxy and so forth before I'm done, so there's no point in me trying to get it perfect right now. If I try and get it perfect, I'd end up cutting into the wood a little bit, and the next time I tried to get it perfect, I'd cut into the wood a little bit more, and before you know it, we've lost some height here. I want to maintain this as close to its original dimension as possible. Just knocking the corner off of that, making so I don't get cut up, and then we'll work on scraping the interior. The interior is really where the scrapers come into their own. With the outside, it's pretty easy to fair out and smooth the surface with everything being convex. You can take a flat tool and use it to round something over, but on the interior, everything's concave, and so if you use something flat, it tends to bridge over the spots you want to work on. So I have a variety of different scrapers with different profiles. Some I've modified myself a little bit to just better fit the shapes I use. These blades come right off, undo the nut, and you can take it to a bench grinder or a belt sander and make it any shape you want. I was just using a file to sharpen them up, but you can use a belt sander or a bench grinder to get them good and sharp as well. And it pays to have them sharp. With these tools, I can find the tool that matches the contour of wherever I'm working, and so I'll end up switching off fairly frequently, just looking for the right tool. Obviously, on a big flat surface, I can hit that big flat surface with a fairly flat, wide blade, make really fast progress. As you get into the tighter corners, you need to switch to a blade with a different contour, and when it's right down into the chines here near the back of the boat, a tool like this that has a corner on it or works well, or this sort of teardrop shape. gets right in there. So the first thing we need to concern ourselves with here is the hot melt glue. It tends to be on there pretty thin, so you could probably scrape right over it without causing problems. But big blobs you might hit and make the blade bounce off the surface, and as you're pulling along, it comes and lands right behind the big blob of glue, making a big gouge. So again, holding it up high and sort of basically you're slicing it off. Some might say you're knocking it off. It depends a little bit on the glue. But instead of trying to scrape away at the surface of the wood and dig under it, we're just holding the blade so the edge of the scraper is following flat onto the surface and sort of like a plane, and we're just slicing off the top edge of it. Once we get rid of the hot melt glue, we can start concerning ourselves with the yellow glue. On the outside, we typically scraped right down the seam of the two strips. That was going to be the highest point, and that's what we want to knock off. Here we're on the inside of the boat, so again we're concave, and so that glue tends to be in the lowest spot. What we really want to do is start removing wood in between the seams, between the strips, so hollowing out the middle of the strip. But again, if we just go down the surface with a tool like this that has a bit of a contour to it, looking at the glue and sort of aiming in between two glue lines, we'll really be making a good start on getting the shape of the interior where we want it. So again, first thing, deal with the hot melt, so to slice it off, then come back and get rid of the yellow glue. And just switch off to a different shape scraper whenever you need to. You could create one scraper with a bunch of different contours, and I lived with one scraper for a long time. Basically, I took a square one, left one edge flat, made a different radius on each of the other three sides, and that ended up working really well for me for a long time. Now, since I'm teaching classes, I end up buying a bunch of them for classes, and it's good to have a bunch of different shapes. So now I have the luxury of being able to just switch off from one tool to the next. I think that's it for today. I didn't get a whole lot done. I got a late start, but the coaming ring has started. I got started scraping out the hull. Things are going well. It looks good. So next episode, we'll finish scraping out the hull. We'll work some more on the coaming, and hopefully we'll get into sanding a little bit on the hull tomorrow. We'll see how far we get. The next few days are going to be working on the interior of the hull and then the deck, and hopefully we'll pretty soon get to doing glassing on the interior. I'm contemplating doing some sort of exotic fiber on the inside, carbon fiber or carbon Kevlar. Primarily aesthetically, I just like the looks of that modern weave on the inside contrasting with the wood on the outside. I think it looks pretty cool. If you have any opinions, be happy to hear them. And make sure if you have questions, post them in the comments. If you're enjoying this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you're enjoying this whole series, hit subscribe and notifications, etc. I appreciate the support through questions and likes and subscriptions. And if you're really into it, go over to Patreon. But whatever, you know, it's fun to be able to share this information with you. And I appreciate your feedback any way you can provide it. So until the next episode, thanks for watching and happy paddling.